for organizing this, and thank to all the participants for attending. As I said before, given that you're all high school students, that means you're the future of the world. My generation messed it up, you guys inherited, and now you will solve it all. In all fairness, we will try to help you so that basically you have a future. So what I'm going to be talking about is actually, it's a quite lengthy presentation, but I don't think that it's going to be dry. At least I will not try to make it dry. So we're going to talk about the Astana International Financial Center. That's an initiative that is now around, or that was initially envisioned about 5.5 years ago. I was part of the initial envisioning when I was the member of the board of the National Investment Corporation of the National Bank. And I'm going to be talking about the mission, vision, values, but also the strategic direction that we're taking and how that will contribute, or how we believe that this could contribute to the sustainable economic development of the region, and Kazakhstan, of course, as well. So my name is Professor Alexander van der Putte. I'm a Chief Strategy Officer at the AIFC. I have several other roles, but also one of them is the chairman of the AIFC Academic Council. And I'm also a professor of strategy and strategic foresight at IE Business School, used to be known as Instituto de Empresa in Madrid. And here we go. So as an agenda, 5 key items. So first of all, I want to talk with you about the new realities. Recent, current, and emerging. Why is that important? Well, if we look at risk and opportunity, it's very important to understand both endogenous, internal, but also exogenous, external risks. And these external risks, or the new realities, need to be internalized. We'll talk about that as the first topic on the agenda today. Then I will talk about the ecosystem that we have developed at the AIFC. We call it a dynamic ecosystem that has 2 overlapping parts, but it's also aligned with the AIFC vision and mission. And I will talk about the vision, the mission, but also about our values. Values are an important determinant of what drives long-term sustainable value. Then I will be talking about the need to develop capital markets, because capital markets drive both liquidity and increase capital inflows, but also over time, they tend to reduce the cost of capital. As a result, they improve the environment to conduct business. And then we will talk about the 4IR, that's the fourth industrial revolution, and that will accelerate digital trade, but also has the potential to contribute to sustainable growth, not only at the business level, but also at the country and the regional level. And then finally, I'm going to talk about leadership in the era of the 4IR. And actually, this is about my forthcoming book, which is called exactly the same, Leadership in the Era of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I will try to highlight a couple of things why leadership in the future will be, to some degree, different than leadership that we had in the past. And I will especially talk about your generation, Generation Z, and the way that Generation Z could have actually a material impact, a leadership impact actually on the future, not only of our planet, but also of societies. So let me now first start with the new realities, recent, current, and emerging. So what are these? So first of all, and this is, well, I call it a new reality, but actually it's one of the recent realities. So what have we observed during the bear market in 2011-2015? That the commodity supercycle, which was largely driven by China, came to an end. And I would also argue that it's unlikely, and this was even before COVID-19, that it's unlikely that it's going to find a new growth model. So I think that commodities will be there to stay to some degree, but that especially fossil fuels are becoming increasingly uninvestable. We already see that with thermal coal, for example, that in OECD countries, but not just in OECD countries, also in China, for example, which is not part of the OECD, has become increasingly uninvestable. And the reason is because some of these externalities around climate change are being internalized as a cost, not as a benefit. But there are other reasons as well that slow the commodity supercycle, or that imply that there will not be a new commodity supercycle going forward. And there is obviously trade tensions, global trade tensions. We see in Europe Brexit, and it's not developing well, unfortunately. I am myself from Belgium, and in all fairness, I think that the United Kingdom should never have left the European Union. Together, we can actually drive much better sustainable growth going forward. Also, the tensions we see in the Middle East, but also especially the tensions that we are seeing between the US and China. And also other, maybe lesser, but equally important to some degree, is tensions between China and India, and over sometimes contested territories, but also in the South China Sea. So all these things don't make it easy in order for global physical trade actually to continue to grow. And we will talk a little bit about global physical trade and what we have observed in, well, especially since the global financial economic crisis. So I will get back on that later on. But also another aspect I will be talking about is that there is increased emphasis on sustainability. And this is really driven by the millennials and also Gen Z. That the focus needs to be on building sustainable, inclusive, resilient societies. So many of the things that are on this slide will be touched upon later on during other slides. So one of the things I referred to already was that sustainability has come to the fore. And there were two global initiatives that were ratified. For those who want to study law, they probably know that ratification means that now commitments, legal commitments, have been made. And that means that countries have to meet these legal commitments. So what are these sustainability commitments that have been made? On the one hand, on the left side of the screen is the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN, United Nations, 2015, so almost 5 years that they have been ratified. The Paris Agreement, it says actually 2015 on the right-hand side here, but it was ratified actually in 2016. Now, the UN Sustainable Development Goals is not just about global climate change. It's also about inequality, and equality is unfortunately on the rise. COVID-19 is definitely not helping it. And so it has actually identified 17 sustainable development goals. Some are indeed environmental in nature. Others are social in nature, yet others are about economic sustainability as well. The Paris Agreement is largely about global climate change. And in other words, it may be to some degree more limiting than the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time, very important. There is a slide that or a cartoon that I don't have here, but it shows actually 4 waves. The first wave is actually COVID-19, and it's a small wave. The second one is actually the recession, which is a bigger wave. And we are already, most countries are in a recession. The third one actually is global climate change, and that wave is even bigger. And then the fourth one is actually the eco-diversity, and you may have heard that actually several thousands of species are now extinct because of human behavior that is not sustainable. So we tend to be focused on current crises, which is the pandemic. I'm not trying to say that the pandemic is not important. It is, of course, very significant, not only from a societal, a health perspective, but also from an economic perspective. But global climate change is of a magnitude at least 10, if not 20 times bigger than actually is the global pandemic that we currently are experiencing. So that's number 2. That's one that is also recent, but is increasingly taking traction and focus by countries and companies alike. So as an example, and it's not the only example, the European Union has what they call the New Green Deal. And there the objective is to be carbon neutral by 2050. And some environmentalists are saying this is taking too long. And actually they're looking at ways actually to potentially accelerate that. Several companies, and interestingly, some companies that were at the center of global climate change, like the oil and gas majors, have also made very, very important commitments to become a carbon neutral company. Shell is one of them. Total, BP are yet other examples of companies that actually, although they have been operating in oil and gas, which is far from sustainable from an environmental perspective, that they have made commitments that they want to be carbon neutral also by 2050. Number 3, the 4th industrial revolution has arrived. So let me first use the definition of Klaus Schwab. He is the executive chairman and the founder of the World Economic Forum. You probably don't know, but I used to work for the World Economic Forum, and I know Klaus very well. Now, what did he say about 3 years ago, just before Davos 2017? He said the 4th industrial revolution is arriving. It's arriving actually very fast. And it's the fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds. Now, for some people, immediately they bring forward some ethical issues as well. For example, human cloning. In some societies, that's a total taboo. In other societies, that's considered. And actually, in some societies, human cloning is considered in order to create, let's say, the perfect warrior, right? So immediately with those aspects, some ethics of the 4th industrial revolution come to the fore as well. However, if we deploy it well, it has major benefits too. And it's based on advances in AI, artificial intelligence. So that basically means that it's not humans that reason, it's actually, instead of the humans, the reasoning is largely happening by super and even quantum computers together with algorithms. That doesn't mean they're designed to replace humans. In some cases, actually, it is. We'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. And other things are distributed ledger technologies, very often referred to as blockchain. Things like robotics, which have been around for a long time, let's say in the automotive industry, manufacturing, but also you have software robots that are used for currency hedging, as an example. Now, robotics combined with AI and blockchain has enormous potential in a variety of sectors. Consider, for example, the agriculture sector. This combined with 5G connectivity and the Internet of Things can dramatically improve the yields, but also make agriculture production much more sustainable because less fertilizer will be used, but also it will use less water, and the crop yields at the same time will increase. So these things can actually be used in order to make certain things much more sustainable. And I'm using just one example. There are many other examples. Other things are 3D printing or additive manufacturing, genetic engineering. We touched upon that already before. And quantum computing is of a magnitude faster than supercomputing. Imagine we can use quantum computing for future potential virus outbreaks. And therefore, we can not only anticipate them better because of artificial intelligence combined with it, but also we can potentially find cures quicker. And because of that, the outbreak will not translate into a pandemic. So I typically like to think about the positives of the fourth industrial revolution, but we should be concerned about the potential negatives and the ethics of 4IR as well. I referred to this before, and I mentioned that I was going to talk about this. And so if I could ask you a couple of questions. My first question would be, and please use the chat box, and you may have seen it already, but the first question is, how many people in the world live outside of the country that they were born in? So please give me an indication by typing in the chat box. As a percentage of total, obviously, it cannot exceed 100%. So how many people live outside their home country? In other words, the country they were born in. Please be brave. 30%, 3%. It's a big difference. Anybody else? 50%. 32. Okay, we have a few indications. And you may be surprised that most of you are going to be way off. But we'll get back to that in a minute. Another question is, so now this is a different question, yes? So let me type it in, different question. So the question here is, as a percentage of total production, how many goods that are manufactured are exported to other countries? As a percentage of total manufactured products. We're not talking about services. We're talking about manufactured products. As a percentage of total. So this is a different question. So I assume that Florentiana was still referring to the previous question, but from now on, please only focus on the percentages of export. So we have 85, I see here, 35, 68. So again, we have a broad range here, but it seems to be that it kind of anchors around a number that is above 50%. Well, it's going to surprise you. It surprised me, by the way, as well. So, the thing is that actually only 3% of the people live outside their home country. Someone actually got that right. That was actually, I cannot read the name. It's probably, it's written in a different alphabet. And then if we look at global economic output, it's 20%. So only 20% of global economic output is exported to other countries. and only 3% live outside of their home country or the country they're born in. Now, so globalization is overestimated, but it continues. And let me now go to the left-hand side here. And let me first look at the yellow line. So the yellow line is here. You can probably see my mouse as well. And we saw the peak of global trade, that's physical trade. We saw that in 2008. So 2008, we saw the peak in global physical trade. Then a decline because of the global financial economic crisis. So most of you were about 7, 8 years old when this happened, and or even younger. And that is slow recovery. But look at it. If you look at this point, even until the end of last year, which is not shown on this slide, physical trade had not yet recovered to its 2008 peak. And I would argue, especially now with COVID-19, it will never recover. And I get back to that in a minute as well. Let's look at the gray line, capital. That's global capital flows. And well, the peak happened in 2007. The decline was even more pronounced. Well, it's difficult to stop physical flows, but it's much easier to stop financial and even digital flows. They can also recover quicker. And interestingly, global financial or capital flows have recovered towards the end of 2019. But again, with COVID-19, they're going to take a big dip, even a bigger dip than we have seen in following the global financial economic crisis. People flows, I'm not going to pay too much attention to right now, but what we see with people flows, it continues, independent of crises, except for this one. If we talk about people flows, we will, and we're not taking into account here migration because of wars, like we see a lot of migration coming into Europe, but also a lot of migration coming into the US, is that is to some degree continuing, but not linked to, let's say, business travel or even leisure travel. And again, that has to do with restrictions to enter countries and so on. But now I want you to pay attention to global information flows. Look at this slide. Not affected at all by the global financial economic crisis. And if we look now with COVID-19, is that physical and global capital flows are definitely down. I don't have the data on it yet, but rest assured that global information flows continue to grow. We are connected around the world. I heard that participants come from something like 30 countries, and we're connected through the internet. And actually, the technology makes sure that we remain connected. You can see me, you can hear me, we can use the chat box, and you can also see the slides. 20 years ago, impossible. That did not exist. And if you look at the market capitalization is the number of shares that a company has multiplied by the share price, so that it has an indication of the value of a company. Then the global tech companies, the Googles, the Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, are all hovering between 1.6 and 2 trillion, not a billion, trillion dollars. So very sizable companies, and that's largely driven by global information flows that are continuing to accelerate. It may surprise you that Europe remains the world's most globalized continent. Well, and that's because of historical reasons, but also geographic location and time zone reasons. In Europe, you never have, apart if you look at Australia, but if you look at both Asia Pacific, Japan, Indonesia, which is pretty far out from a time zone perspective, and on the other hand, the west coast of the United States, we are between 7 and 9 hours time difference. Whereas if you would be on the East Coast in the United States, there would be currently with Singapore a 12-hour time difference. Whereas with continental Europe, let's say Belgium, again, the country I'm from, I'm not in Belgium right now, I'm in Kazakhstan, but there would be only a 6-hour time difference. So central location obviously helps about being a globalized continent, but also historical reasons. Parag Khanna, Dr. Khanna, he said the 19th century was the European century, the 20th century was the North American century. He believes that the 21st century is going to be the Asian century, and I would say, Parag, and he's a good friend of mine, I would say, what if the 21st century, because of factors we previously discussed, like the trade tensions and so on, would be the Eurasia century? And Eurasia is a very large continent where 5.5 billion people live and on a single landmass. The shift in economic gravity continues from west to east. Well, it's just normal. There are more people there. Economic growth is much faster. And as a result, just look at China and India combined. They have a population in excess of 2.6 billion people, where in continental Europe, excluding, let's look at the European Union for now, excluding the United Kingdom. They're going to leave at the end of the year. We're talking about 350 million. So 350 million versus just two countries, 2.6 billion. Same on the side of North America. US is the most populous. We're talking also about roughly 350 million. And in Africa, there are quite a number of countries with large populations, including Nigeria and so on, but nothing comes close to nor China nor India. So that shift in economic gravity continues from west to east and maybe even accelerating. We already talked about the fourth industrial revolution, but what we see is actually that it's accelerating disruptive change. And on the left-hand side, we have changes in economic growth. And just as an example, it took Britain at the time, first industrial revolution, 155 years to double GDP per capita. 155 years, 1.5 centuries. The US and Germany, between 30 and 60. Actually, the US was 30, Germany 60. But look at India and China. Compared to Britain, when they doubled their GDP per capita, they have 100 times the people, and they're doing it in a tenth of the time. So they're doubling GDP per capita with a much larger country in about 15 to 16 years. That is acceleration in economic growth, and especially economic growth as measured by GDP per capita. On the right-hand side, it's about absorption of new technologies. This is based on data from the United States, because there we have actually a lot of data available for a long period of time. And let me just contrast two. So if you look at electricity, it took 46 years for electricity to reach 25% of the American population, where the World Wide Web took 7 years in order to reach 25% of the population. And if you look at radio versus color TV, we can look at 31 versus 18 years. And we can make the same contrast for telephone, traditional fixed line telephone, and mobile telephony. So what countries do, and we see that in, I've been to Bangladesh, I've been to Pakistan, I've been to many African countries, including sub-Saharan African countries. they're not going to go anymore with old mobile technology. They leapfrog. They immediately go to the latest technology. And they have some of the most advanced smartphones that we can sometimes only dream of in Western countries. So the absorption rates are not, this is an example of the US, but it's also the case in other countries. The absorption rate of new technologies is much, much faster than before. So that's the first part. So some new realities, we looked at existing, emerging, and also some of the ones that are already there, the current ones. Let me now look at the AIFC. I'm going to talk about the vision. I'm going to talk about the mission. I'm also going to talk about the strategic directions, but also about the ecosystem and why we believe that because of our dynamic ecosystem, we will be able to turn the challenges and the opportunities that are there that we previously discussed into sustainable economic growth. So if we look at a hub or a cluster or an ecosystem, and whether that's Silicon Valley, whether that is the one that is based in Shanghai, in China, or in Tokyo, or in Barcelona, or in around Oxford and Cambridge, or around Harvard and MIT, it doesn't matter. They both have two overlapping sub-ecosystems. In the case of the AIFC, Astana International Financial Center, on the right-hand side here, the one in green is the financial sector players. And here we see traditional financial sector players. They include companies like brokerage firms, investment banks, insurance companies, and so on. On the left-hand side, we call it AIFC Tech. The reason is that these are nimble, small startups and tech entrepreneurs that tend to focus on tech that is relevant for the financial sector. So that could be fintech, and they leverage increasingly fourth industrial revolution concepts, as we discussed before, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, in that case, most likely software robotics, but also blockchain and similar types of things. The reason why it's overlapping is that because in the middle, in the overlapping part, there are a number of service providers. And it's these service providers that actually makes this a dynamic ecosystem. They include venture capitalists, they include lawyers, auditors, tax and management consultants, interim talent and vocational training providers. And today, Asel, for example, she is with the BCPD, the Bureau for Continuous Professional Development. I'm the chairman of the board of the BCPD. And we are, in essence, a vocational training provider. Historically, we focused on the skills to focus on the financial professional of the future. But increasingly, we're also looking at people that are going to be employed in fields like tech and coding. So we have recently created, for example, a school that it's called, based on an initiative that's called Quant. And here, actually, we will have people that know how to code. And as a result, they can work in a variety of tech sectors, small companies, but also potentially larger companies. The financial sector players, the green ones, they can either innovate from within, and that's difficult, or they can actually finance startups in AIFC Tech, but also later on potentially use their services or even buy them out. And this whole concept, actually, we see in many clusters around the world. And we have designed our ecosystem in the same way. if we look at what we focus on in the Astana International Financial Center, is actually 6 pillars. Number 1 is capital markets, and we created the Astana International Exchange together with the Shanghai Stock Exchange and with Nasdaq as a technology platform. And that makes us the most innovative technology listing platform in, especially in the region, potentially in the world, because Nasdaq is a very innovative technology platform. Number 2 is asset management. In the region here, including former Soviet Union countries, there's a lot of wealth. Now that wealth needs to have a certain return. So with asset management, the objective actually is to manage wealth, both sovereign wealth and wealth in the hands of individuals, and actually to make sure that they find bankable projects or equities to invest in. Then we have banking on the right-hand side, and that includes private banking, but especially banking like retail banking. And as you all know, who still goes to the bank themselves? Now we have a lot of mobile banking, so these banking companies have to reinvent themselves, and very often they go and look for ways to do that and disrupt themselves. Islamic finance, there's a strong force behind Islamic finance. Obviously, if you look at Kazakhstan, the lion's share of the population are Muslims in the region as well, and Islamic finance is a strong force, not only in Islamic countries, but also if we look at, for example, in London, Islamic finance is dramatically on the rise there as well. Then financial technology, fintech. It's not just about cryptocurrencies, but it's a variety of financial technologies that make banking and financial services substantially more nimble and effective and accessible to a broad population, not just those that typically are banked. And as a result, the bankable rate of populations and countries can dramatically increase. It goes from simple things like mobile payments to that can only be a few dollars, or even having a loan, or having an entire portal where you can actually manage your wealth through. And then finally, insurance. Well, we all have to accept some risks, but there's some risks that actually are what we often consider as collective risks, where the potential risks are so high, but given that if something happens, but the probability is so low, that insurance actually makes a lot of sense to have. We see that in car insurance, property insurance, but also over time we need to think about life insurance, because that may be very important, especially in families where you only have one person that depends on the entire family. If something happens with that individual, very often has dire effects on the family as a whole, especially if you have children still in school. So those are the pillars, but now let me turn to our vision. Now, first of all, what is a vision? A vision is actually a longer term aspiration. And I studied at Harvard Business School a long time ago, 25 years ago, had a professor there, John Carter, and he would say the following: a vision has to be specific enough to give direction, yet vague enough to allow initiative. So there need to be an element of specificity to provide strategic direction, but if we basically cast it in stone, then it will not allow people in the organization to take initiative about how actually to reach that longer term objective. So this is longer term. It is not tomorrow, this is not next year, this is longer term. So we want to become the leading international financial center in the region. Now, there's an asterisk at the region here because it's not just Central Asia, but also it includes the Caucasus, Eurasian Economic Union, Western China, Mongolia, and also Eastern Europe. It's a broad, big region. And the reason why we focus on the entire region is because currently there is no global or international state-of-the-art financial center. And that's going to be needed if we want to attract foreign direct investment into the economy. That's going to be needed. So that's our vision. So the vision is a longer term objective, and then our mission. Our mission, how can I best define our mission? Actually, it's put on the slide here. The reason why we exist. Why do we exist? Why do people every day that work out in the AIFC jump out of their bed and they ask themselves, what am I going to do? Well, they will do things that contribute to the sustainable economic development of the region by fostering innovative financial products and services. There's several interesting words here, I would say. So we really exist for the development of the region, the economic development of the region. But it's not just in the short term, it's also about the sustainable economic development. And we define here sustainable economic development as balancing and growing all 5 capital stocks simultaneously. What are these 5 capital stocks? First of all, it's natural capital, the environment, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil on which we grow our crops. Number 2, manufactured capital, and this is seen in its broader sense. It includes, for example, the servitization of manufacturing, which is really on the rise as well, especially these days. Human capital, investing in the human development of those that are going to be active in the economy, but also those that just have an interest in their own development. Social development, to make sure that we don't have inequality that is rising, especially in Western societies, as written by Thomas Piketty in his book Capital, an interesting book. It's a very thick book. It's about 8 centimeters thick. But if you ever have the time and you're interested in inclusiveness and social capital, this is a very good book to read. And then, of course, financial capital, because financial capital is about developing the economy from an economic perspective. So, but what if we can actually grow and balance all of them simultaneously? That's our aim. There are companies that have illustrated that it's possible. There are even countries that have illustrated that it is possible to grow and balance all 5 capital stocks simultaneously. That's our mission. And that's the reason why we exist. Values. And I will later talk about what drives long-term success of companies. And they will be linked back to values, at least one of them. We have identified 4. And interestingly, they link to AIFC, or Astana International Financial Center. One is accountability. Accountable to whom? Accountable to the company, accountable to our colleagues, accountable to society at large. Number 2 is integrity. It's the way, actually, the norms and behaviors that we actually adopt in our daily lives, but also in our professional life. A focus on the future. It's easy to look backwards, but companies that look backwards will inevitably be disrupted by those actually that look at the future. C is collaboration. Alone, in all fairness, we're nothing. But by working together and have a collaborative mindset, we can achieve a lot. And that's going to be very important for us to achieve our success. So it's a combination of accountability, integrity, forward-looking and a collaborative mindset that is going to help us reach our mission and fulfill and even live our mission or purpose. So that's number 2. So we have 3 more to go. Let me have a look at my watch. I need to talk faster. So now we're going to look at capital markets to drive liquidity and increase capital flows. And I'm going to talk about 2. I'm going to talk about capital markets in general, and I'm going to talk about also development of an SME market. I also saw there was a Q&A. There's a question here from David. Does increasingly apply robotic using AI in financial market boost the risk into crises? What is the effect of increasing using robotics, AI in financial towards international capital flows, hence economic inequalities? That's a very good question. Why is it a good question? Because it could go either way. Yes. I've been last year, was it last year? I think, no, it was the year before. At the Astana Finance Days, which is our annual forum at the AIFC, I facilitated a panel on AI and ethics. And so we had a lot of experts from Yale, Oxford, but also some entrepreneurs in there, and even some regulators that were talking about AI and ethics, especially applied to the financial markets. And their belief is that over time, AI will take care of biases, whether that is, where actually humans will not take care of biases. So AI will, in essence, perfect itself in order to eliminate biases, so that in other words, we would not risk having an increased focus on, let's say, on equality, but also that it would lead to financial crises that we have seen, for example, in 2007, 2008. In the shorter term, that risk is obviously there. Now, what is very important, however, is that one should not leave AI to be managed by AI. Humans will always have to manage AI and have to take care of their responsibilities, their duties, in order to contribute to longer-term success of both the company and the societies in which they operate. And therefore, they have to provide the proper oversight. Is it easy? No, but the opportunities are definitely there. So let me now talk about the importance actually of transitioning from frontier to emerging market status. And we're looking at 2 indices, MSCI, which is Morgan Stanley Capital Markets Index, and the FTSE Russell. Morgan Stanley Capital Markets Index is now separate from Morgan Stanley, but it's still called MSCI. I believe it's headquartered in London now. And we're dealing with the people in Geneva, and also the FTSE Russell, obviously based in London. Now, they have frontier markets, they have emerging markets, they have developed markets. And this should not be confused with, for example, what the World Bank defines as what is an emerging market. Kazakhstan is, for example, still a frontier market from a capital market perspective. So we now have an initiative to, both for MSCI and for FTSE Russell, and in assistance with the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, to transition from frontier to emerging market. And that would have 3 big benefits. Number 1 is increased capital inflows. So you will have more money coming into the country and the region, and therefore that money can find bankable, sustainable projects to drive economic growth. Number two, enhanced liquidity. And when you have enhanced liquidity, you have lower volatility. And when you have lower volatility because of enhanced liquidity, over time, you also lower the cost of capital. I'm not going to give you a lecture on corporate finance here, but when we look at the cost of capital, there's a very strong relationship between the volatility of your stock price and the cost of capital. So the higher the volatility, the higher the risk tends to be, and as a result, the higher the cost of capital tends to be. So if we can lower that volatility, we will have also a lower cost of capital. So three main benefits is more money coming in, lower volatility, lower cost of capital. And therefore, a more interesting place to do business in if you are not anymore a frontier market. Number two is, if you look at OECD countries, SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, are roughly speaking 65% of the economy. So the remaining is actually 35%, and that's big business, and that's government and education. But SMEs, 65%. If you look at many emerging countries, including Kazakhstan, it's typically less than 30%. In Kazakhstan, at the end of 2019, it was 28%. What are the challenges? The challenges for SMEs that they very often don't have opportunities to develop a business. Number two, that they don't necessarily find the talent to recruit, but also, and critically so, that they don't have access to finance to grow their business. So what we want to do is, not only do we want to attract venture capitalists and other private equity firms, we also want to develop an SME market. An SME market basically means that a company over time, a small, medium-sized enterprise over time, can list its business on a stock exchange in what is called an SME market or a middle market. So what would that do? And we see four main benefits, not three, but four. Number one is, once a venture capitalist decides to say, hey, it's time to bank in on my investment, what are my exit options? Well, an exit option would be that the company would get a listing, and because of a listing, the VC firm, the venture capitalist, exits, but also there is remaining capital left for the business to grow itself. Number two is, well, I already talked about number two only. So let me go to blue, the blue one. So it provides equity capital beyond what the VC could provide. Number three is, it also bolsters corporate governance. Why is that important? Because after all, it is the boards that lead, and the very often requirements as through the listing agency in order to have, let's say, independent directors and better corporate governance, including governance reporting in terms of transparency, accountability, and so on. But also, if you're listed, you have much higher visibility towards market participants, potential future customers, and so on. And as a result, these four benefits together provide with significant ways for an SME market to flourish. And this is one of our priorities as well here. It's not just a big market for big IPOs, but it's also the SME market in order to stimulate entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is actually a very significant force for companies to adopt. Number four, the fourth industrial revolution to accelerate digital trade and sustainable growth. We talked about the fourth industrial revolution already, and we provided the definition. What I would like to do here, and I'm trying to reduce my Zoom box a little bit. Let me move it to the left here. I have this big 43-inch screen on my desk. So it looks like I'm all over, but actually I'm looking at my screen. So first, second, third industrial revolution, fourth industrial revolution. Interestingly, is that a couple of factors about this. The first industrial revolution took 150 years. The second one, roughly 75. The third one, 35. The question is, how long is the fourth one going to take? It's already happening. And as we discussed before, the 4IR is dramatically accelerating technology adoption and even economic gravity. So hang on there, because it's going to be a rocky ride for those that don't have their act together. Speed is of the essence. Now, if you look at the first and the second industrial revolution, it was primarily driven by West-West trade. It was Europe, within Europe, it was Europe with United States. And if we look at the third industrial revolution, we really saw globalization, historical globalization at least, based on physical trade that really took off. But now, increasingly, for reasons we looked at during the realities, the new realities, we see increasingly digital trade. And that's, additive manufacturing is a very good example of that one. Yes, economic gravity continues, the shift in it, but also there's an enormous potential for the focus on sustainability and even dematerialization. And therefore, we can potentially meet many of the commitments that we have made for SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, but also with reference to the Paris Agreement, global climate change. Now, we then asked ourselves, what does that mean for our strategic directions at the AIFC? So where do we want to attract capital into the market, the regional market, in order to achieve our vision and live up to our mission? And we have three things. First of all, we want to do things smarter. And we want to do that by leveraging the circular economy. And there, as a result, we want to make existing industries more sustainable and competitive. What is the circular economy? The circular economy really is about 4 R's. The first one is maintain and repair. So the repair part is very important. As opposed to getting new fibers, virgin fibers from earth through mining, now we're going to repair, and as a result, we can reuse. And that's actually the second one. Reuse or redistribute. The third one is refurbish or remanufacture. And then the final one is recover and recycle. If we can do that, not only will we change from a linear economy to a circular economy, we will create a lot of entrepreneurship in these various parts that we have here: repair, redistribute, remanufacture, recycle. But equally important, we're going to use less resources, virgin fibers, but also less energy. And as a result, it will contribute to balancing and growing all 5 capital stocks. Number 2 is we want to focus on investing in physical and digital infrastructure. It's not just physical infrastructure like ports, railways, roads, and so on, which have a high economic multiplier, but also digital infrastructure like 5G connectivity, Internet of Things, that allow actually the 4th industrial revolution as the backbone of the 4th industrial revolution. And then finally, we want to leverage the 4IR on top of that digital and physical infrastructure and enable digital trade and also a digital One Belt, One Road, but also potentially, and this is a new emerging vision that we have at the AIFC, is a Eurasia renewable energy internet. And that's only one that has been articulated over the past few months. And you can picture the Eurasia renewable energy internet as follows. We would have largely distributed renewable energy sources like wind, solar, but also hydro. We would then have on short distances, we would have connectivity between that. We would also have storage solutions. And storage solutions could be compressed air, they could be batteries, there could be a variety of technologies in order to store electricity when actually the intermittent sources actually are not able to generate them. But what is also important is actually two other layers. We would have very ultra high speed voltage lines at 1.1 million volt, and they already exist. In China, they have more than 20 operational already, and the last one spans 1,000 miles, not 1,000,000 miles, of course. So that's 1,600 kilometers, roughly speaking, at 1.1 million volts with minimal or no losses. And then the final layer is actually the whole software layer that actually uses artificial intelligence, blockchain in order to store the data. And what happens is that basically it's to balance the loads and distribute the energy where it's needed so that basically everybody has access to affordable energy, sustainable and affordable energy. And the beauty of all of this is that it would make the system much more resilient. So that's what we want to do. This is our strategic objectives, and they are entirely linked or aligned with our mission. And the AIFC can be instrumental to making that happen. Aha! The last thing. I kept, in my view, the most interesting to the last. But that's my view. You may like this less, but I think for you especially, it's very important. I think it could help you make some decisions about what to do next after high school. Do I want to create my own company? Do I want to have an apprenticeship, have vocational training? Do I want to enroll in university? And also what kind of fields and what kind of skills do I want to acquire? Because in the end, in the fourth industrial revolution, we're talking about not only a different skill set, we're talking about a different mindset. And it's that combination of different mindset and different skill set that will allow you actually to navigate the uncertainty going forward in your careers and in your personal lives. So, a couple of things. First of all, it's culture, personas, and skills that together will define leadership in the era of the fourth industrial revolution. So let me start with one. First of all, culture, corporate culture drives resilience. And we'll talk about that in a minute, based on a survey that I have conducted since I left the World Economic Forum now 10 years ago. Actually, a little bit more than 10 years ago. Number two is leadership personas. They share a commitment to doing good. And I will show you 4 examples of leadership personas. Then finally, leadership skills also need evolving. And that's why I'm saying it's really a combination of both skills, competencies, and mindsets that will drive leadership going forward. So this is about the survey that I was talking about. And I'm running this survey since 2007. So the first results came available in 2008. And it was really looking at, well, what really drives resilience in companies and long-term performance? And the first thing is, and I start here at the top right, is shared values. And remember that I spoke about the values of the AIFC. Accountability, integrity, forward-looking collaboration. Now, successful companies, resilient companies, as part of their culture, they have, first of all, they have deeply embedded and shared values. So wherever you go in the organization, you will find similar values and their understanding of it, and they provide a guide to action. In other words, people will make certain decisions that are aligned with the values of the organization. And that basically means that people, leaders, individuals have to align their own purpose with the purpose of the organization. Why is that important? Because you're not going to be happy in an organization where your personal values and purpose are different. Over my career, I worked actually, luckily, in a number of organizations where actually I really like the values and I felt at home. And as a result, I was probably performing much better as well. I was happier, I was performing better, and so on. In other organizations, I may have been less happy. And that may be one of the reasons why I'm not there anymore. I'm not going to cite any examples of companies I wasn't particularly happy about, because that would be my personal judgment, and maybe other people have a different experience. But in my case, in some companies, I didn't really feel at home. That's number one. Number two is, increasingly companies are looking at beyond profit. Is profit important? Well, I have a PhD in corporate finance. If you look at corporate finance, it's all about risk and return, and it's all about looking at, well, how are we going to value a project, how are we going to value a company, how are we going to find the optimal capital structure, and it's all about driving value. So, but would you be surprised that actually there are increasingly a lot of companies that are looking at beyond just profit? Amundi recently did a study. Actually, they completed the study at the beginning of last year, so it's almost 2 years ago, looking at 2 periods of 3 years. And what they learned is that the last 3 years of their study, that the returns on ESG compliant investments, so those investments that were more sustainable, had higher economic returns. Which in other words is, doing good is also good for the shareholder. Number 3 is they have an experimental mindset. What does that mean? They always experiment with small little things at the edges of their market, and they manage it like a venture capitalist. When something will not pay off, they let it go. Where actually those that have potential, they will give additional nutrients and they will grow. And that experimental mindset actually allows the companies to continuously reinvent themselves and for them to exist over a very long period of time. Number 4 is peripheral vision. You see, I wear glasses and I typically look through my lenses. But there are weak signals, and the weak signals are here. They're in the periphery, they're not in my main vision. What we tend to do, we don't tend to look into the periphery. But this is where the weak signals are. As an anecdote, I was facilitating at Davos, January 2007, with 4 Nobel Prize winners in economics. By the way, all American in this case, from Stiglitz to Stiglitz was there. Who else was there? Kenneth Rogoff, Daniel Kahan, who was at Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and also Paul Krugman. And basically they said the following. So this was before the global financial economic crisis. They said, we have enough weak signals out there to tell you, and there were virtually all financial market bankers in the room, many of them American bankers. And they said, well, a global financial economic crisis is upon us. It's going to be driven by the subprime mortgage. And actually, there's still something you can do about it. Interestingly, someone stood up. It was the chairman and chief executive of Lehman Brothers and said, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. We're doing perfectly well. And then he left the room. 18 months later, Lehman Brothers was bankrupt. So yes, you can be blindsided because of externalities that are not internalized. And that was a very good example of lack of peripheral vision. It's important to have peripheral vision, to look in the periphery and observe the weak signals and ask yourself, what does it mean for me? Finally, these companies are financially conservative. What does that mean? Is that you typically have less debt than equity. You're probably properly financed. And remember, debt you have to pay back, debt you have to service, the interest. Equity, you don't have to pay back, you don't have to service. So you can face actually insolvency, i.e. bankruptcy, by not being financially conservative. So these five different factors come together as the culture of an organization actually drives resilience. And resilience is very important, especially if we consider the current environment. What else? Personas. So I put these people on it. So these are based on my viewpoint. I know two of them personally. I used to work for McKinsey, so I know the organization also very well. So let's start with social supers. Paul Polman, a Dutchman, previously the chief executive of Unilever, he actually looks at both purpose and profit. And these executives make a business case for being a force for good to drive change. He has done it remarkably well. Unilever has done remarkably well as well from a shareholder perspective, not just from a societal perspective. Number two is the data-driven decisive. The example here is Carlos Ghosn. Let's forget about the recent debacle around Japan and Lebanon and how he escaped. But he transformed largely the automotive industry and also made sure that two companies, potentially even more, but the two larger ones, Renault and Nissan, survived. Very data-driven, very decisive, very bold. And these executives are able to translate data and analytics into decisions and capitalize on the opportunities. And they're very often known as the turnaround executive. So there's a company that doesn't do very well, but basically a captain of industry can actually turn that company around for the better. Then we have, and by the way, I know Paul Polman, I know Carlos Ghosn. I don't know Jeff Bezos personally. I would love to know him. He was the first person to become a 200 billion wealth. Mine is not even close to that. So, and not that it's an aspiration either, but I would still love to know him. Lessons learned from him would always be very useful. But he is a very proactive and holistic. So he's a disruption driver. Disruption driver is basically someone who disrupts others and even disrupt themselves. So what has he disrupted? Well, he has disrupted virtually everything that has to do with buying goods. From books initially to virtually anything that you can potentially buy, as long as it's legal. So obviously you cannot buy a tank on Amazon, that would not be legal. He basically created an entire marketplace. He disrupted the whole industry that has to do with buying goods, including even food products, with the recent acquisition a couple of years ago, and ventured in the food business. The last one is the talent champions. The talent champions understand that actually the partners in this case, the owners of the business, because in a consulting firm, which is a private company, not a publicly listed companies, the owners of the business are the partners. They understand that without the staff, they're nothing. Without the consultants, they are nothing. So these executives know the skill set people need, so they know what is needed in order to be successful, are able to get the best out of people. That's really important, not the most, but the best out of people, and prepare the talent for the future. If you look at a company like McKinsey, and we look at CEOs of large companies, in especially Western companies, but not just in Western companies, a lot are McKinsey alumni. They tend to be very, very people-centric. McKinsey is one of the companies that has never laid off people because of economic reasons. The partners will buy in, including during this crisis. They will not lay off a single person because of the pandemic. So 4 different personas, but the key is that leadership personas in the 4th industrial revolution share a commitment to doing good. And they each have their own styles, but they're all important given their own context. We have a few more things and then we will wrap up. Skills needed, and this could be very important for you to consider. Certain things that even the best computers, the fast computers and the best AI algorithms will not be able to take away from you, is things like emotional intelligence, number 6 here. Judgment and decision making, complex problem solving, and critical thinking, creativity. These are and people management. I should not forget these things. Negotiation skills, cognitive flexibility. All these things, computers and the most advanced AI algorithms have substantial difficulty in doing that. That doesn't mean computers cannot help you. AI can help you as well in making decisions. But in the end, if you develop a leadership skill set, that are a number of key aspects here, not necessarily all of them, a number of key aspects from this list, you will be doing very well. And it takes time to develop. So what does that mean? It actually means that even the educational model is changing. I used to work, as I mentioned, at the World Economic Forum. World Economic Forum is based in Switzerland. I had some friends that I developed over the years. And one of them was a private banker who had previously done his career in a large Swiss bank. Let me not cite the name, but a large Swiss bank. And at a certain moment in time, he told me, I don't have a degree. I never went to university. But he was top 10 in the large Swiss bank. And really, I'm talking about a multinational bank. It's not a tiny little cantonal bank, a bank that you would find in any of the provinces in Switzerland. So it was a large multinational bank. And he was top 20, top 25 maybe in the organization. And he said, by the way, I'm not the exception during my time. And the reason is that what the bank would do, and this bank was not the exception either. It was not just him, the exception within the bank, but other financial institutions were doing the same thing. And what they would do, they would recruit someone coming out of high school that wants to have a career in the financial services sector. And then they would develop them through a system of apprenticeship that would lead to a professional qualification.
Это что-то идет прямо сейчас?
Not a degree, but a professional qualification. And actually, they're equally or even better qualified. And the United Kingdom is actually doing exactly the same with lawyers right now. So, but while they study, while they work actually as an apprentice, at the same time, they also enrolled at the university. So they will not only get a degree, they will have a professional qualification, they will also have experience. And it's that combination actually that allows people to develop the key critical skills that are going to be required. I'm going to skip this one. I want to focus on the very last slide, and that's a slide that comes from a statement that I made myself in 2017 following an interview for the Economist publication. It's called Shaping the Future.theeconomist.com, and you can look it up for the full article. But basically, the statement I made is the following, and I would suggest you keep that in mind, not only for the companies you're going to work in, but also for yourself. Corporations need to learn how to navigate uncertainty. You can replace that. Me as an individual need to learn how to navigate uncertainty, because change is now constant and clock speed, whether it's market, technological, or product, is accelerating. We discussed that before. Therefore, the corporation will need both a compass that you see here and a radar. The compass will provide its strategic direction. The radar will provide it with peripheral vision to scan for discontinuities in both the global business environment and within the organization. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, time left for questions, I would be happy to help address them. I've been looking at the chat box. There's nothing new coming. I've also been looking at the Q&A. There's also nothing new coming. So, but happy to address any comments that you may have.
Alexander, thank you for presentation. I think participants don't have questions for you.
No questions. Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating. I hope it was very useful for you. Thank you, Alexander, for presenting the mission, vision, values, and strategy of the Astana International Financial Center. Okay, thank you everyone. So we're finishing this guest lecture.
Thank you, Asel. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and take care. Bye-bye.